In the middle of chemotherapy, my son smirked and said, "Don't expect us to drive you." I bit my tongue then, but I didn't forget. 2 weeks later, I rolled into the clinic parking lot, driving his repossessed car, window down, music loud. Payback never felt so smooth. Wait, before we go any further, I gotta ask, where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments and don't forget to subscribe. The chemo calendar on the fridge looked like a child had drawn it. Bright pink circles around Thursdays, crooked arrows to remind her to drink more water, a sticky note that said, "Bring sweater." Linda stared at it as the phone rang. She paced by the sliding glass door, watching a wind-lifted grocery bag snag itself on the backyard chain link. The house had that winter quiet, furnace humming, clock ticking, the soft rustle of a neighborhood that didn't know what to do with bad news. "Hey, Ma," Derek answered, and immediately the sound shifted, tinny, echoing. Speakerphone. "Hi, honey," she said, keeping her voice level. "Just checking we're still on for tomorrow. I'll be ready at 9. The center moved me up." A woman's voice chimed in, casual as a cashier. "We heard you." Sharon. Dishes clinked. A TV murmured in the background, something upbeat and mindless. "Look," Derek said, and she could hear the inhale, the prepping for a stance. "Don't expect us to drive you every time." Linda felt the words like stepping on ice you thought would hold. "I'm not expecting every time." She took a breath, the kind nurses taught you, the kind that tries to make the body believe you're safe. "I'm asking about tomorrow." "We have work," Sharon said, louder now, "and we can't just drop everything because you didn't plan rides. You're self-sufficient, Linda." "I did plan," she said. "I've been planning." She felt her cheeks warming, old anger, old training to keep it inside. "It's one morning." A pause, the kind people let hang when they're deciding how cruel to be. "We'll see," Derek said. "We can't make promises." "I never asked for a promise," she said, but she was talking to the flat tone of a call that had already ended. The screen flashed "call ended" as if that explained anything. She held the phone in both hands for a moment, felt the arthritis throb at the thumb joint. The kitchen smelled faintly like lemon cleaner and coffee grounds. In the backyard, the plastic bag surrendered and lifted skyward again, disappearing over the fence, and she had the absurd thought that even trash got carried when it needed to be. The ache under her sternum sharpened, not a symptom she could treat. She put the phone down on the counter very gently, like it was a brittle heirloom. By the time she walked outside, the air had turned late afternoon thin, the kind that stripped color from everything. Maggie Ruiz was on her front stoop across the street, sorting coupons with the intensity of someone negotiating a hostage exchange. She didn't look up when she said, "You wear a groove in that siding, Linda. I'm charging you." Linda stopped pacing. She hadn't realized she'd made it all the way down the path and back 3 times. She tucked her hands into the sleeves of her cardigan. "I'm fine." Maggie glanced over the top of her glasses. She took in the tightness around Linda's mouth, the way her shoulders were trying to climb her ears. "You need a ride, or are you auditioning for a marathon?" Linda's throat tightened. She swallowed and tried again. "Number, I'll figure it out." "Is this about the boy?" Linda didn't answer. She didn't have to. Maggie set down the coupons. She had a DMV stare, the kind that could strip a lie down to its undershirt. "I can take you, you know that. I've got a car and nothing better to do than yell at people who don't use their blinkers." "I know." The gratitude was a lump she didn't trust herself to touch. "I won't ask them again." Maggie's mouth softened. She didn't say the obvious thing, which was kindness in itself. "You need anything, you holler." "I will," Linda said. She lied with the same carefulness she'd set the phone down with. She waved and went back in. The warmth hit her cheeks when she stepped inside. The house held its own history, the dent in the pantry door where a Thanksgiving chair had clipped it 10 years ago, the scuffed baseboards from a grandchild's Tonka trucks, back when they still visited on Sundays. She sat at the kitchen table like it was a command post, yellowed wood, a notebook, a pen that sometimes skipped. She drew 2 boxes on a piece of paper and labeled them, in block letters, Plan A and Plan B. Plan A, call the senior center shuttle. She wrote it down, then crossed it out. The schedule was unreliable, and the last time she'd ridden it, the driver had fallen asleep at a red light. Plan B? Uber. She'd used it once to get home from the hospital, chatty teenager who didn't adjust the heat, the car smelling like grape air freshener so strong it tested her stomach. She added in the margin, "Ask Maggie to be a backup." She circled it, then drew a thin line around the circles, a ritual of protection. The pile of mail at the other end of the table slid a little, a flyer releasing itself from the stack with a papery sigh. Linda reached for it without thinking. Credit card offers, 2 catalogs, a church newsletter she hadn't opened since she'd stopped going, and a stark white envelope with Windows service printed on it like a warning. Except it wasn't Windows, it was a blocky typeface, black and impersonal. "Midtown Asset Recovery," the header announced. Below, "Notice of Possession." The name printed there snagged her breath. Derek Foster. Beneath it, in smaller type, CEO, Linda Foster. The room got very quiet. She read it once without understanding, like looking at a photograph out of order. Then again, slower. The letter was curt, the vehicle associated with account ending. 27 had been taken into possession pending payment of arrears. A phone number, office hours, a line that said, "If you are a co-signer or co-owner, you may have rights regarding retrieval." She sat back. The furnace clicked off and the silence changed shape. She thought about a Christmas 5 years ago, Derek pushing a glossy brochure across the table. "They said having a co-signer would get me a better rate, Ma. It's just a formality." He'd used that wobbly smile he always wore when he wanted to sell her something. She'd signed because his father used to be the one to say no. After the funeral, no felt like a betrayal. Outside, a car passed. Country music ghosting through the closed window, tires hushing on cold asphalt. The sun had slid behind the neighbor's maple, turning the kitchen light into a reflection on the window. In it, she could see herself, cardigan shrugged over a t-shirt, hair thinner than it had ever been, eyes that had seen too much and still missed things. She picked up the letter. The paper was cheap, the ink a little smudged where the printer had hiccuped. She read the phone number again until it started to look like a date. Her heartbeat did a slow, heavy drum in her ears. She didn't know exactly what this meant beyond the fact that it was connected to Derek and the car he'd been flashing around at family cookouts like a trophy. "Okay," she said aloud, to the empty room. It wasn't a declaration of war. It was a nurse's word, measured, practical. The part of her that had clicked 4 lines into place and counted drops and held hands in hard hours, she could feel that click now. Something aligning. She slid her notebook closer and copied the number carefully, each digit precise. Next to it, she wrote, "Tomorrow, 8 a.m." Then she placed the letter beneath the notebook as if settling it into a file where it could no longer flutter off and surprise her. Her phone buzzed. A text from Derek, just 3 words, "You okay, Ma?" A second later, a follow-up, "We'll try for next week." She stared at the screen until the letters blurred. Put the phone face down. She turned back to the number and rested her finger on the first digit, the way you might test the temperature of bathwater before stepping in. The house was so still she could hear the refrigerator making its slow, old man noises. She took a breath that went all the way down and, with her finger still hovering, whispered to the room, "Let's see what rights I have." The tip of her finger pressed the first number, then she froze, listening. Tires on gravel, a car coasting to a stop outside her house. Headlights washed through the blinds, slicing the kitchen in pale stripes. Someone was in her driveway. The headlights in her driveway didn't move for a long beat. Linda sat motionless at the table, the repo letter under her palm like a playing card she didn't want to reveal. When the engine finally rumbled away, she watched the light sweep out of the blinds, leaving the kitchen in the dim hum of the fridge again. Whoever it was hadn't knocked. That, somehow, was worse. She reached for the phone before she could talk herself out of it. The number from the letter looked clean and clinical in her handwriting, but as she punched it in, it felt heavier with every digit. 2 rings, then a man's voice, low and steady. "Midtown Asset Recovery, Eli speaking." She didn't bother with small talk. "I received a notice about a vehicle in possession. Derek Foster." Account ending 27. A pause. The soft sound of keys clicking in the background. Yes, ma'am. That vehicle's a black 2019 sedan. It was repossessed this morning for non-payment. His tone was professional, but not cold. You must be Linda? Her name in a stranger's mouth felt like a door opening on a drafty day. Yes. You're listed as a co-signer on the loan. That means you've got rights here, if you want to exercise them. Linda's fingers tightened around the phone. Co-signer? She repeated. The word tasted like that Christmas brochure and Derek's smooth assurances. So, I could get it back? If you cover the arrears and any associated fees, yes, it's not small change, but it's yours to reclaim if you want it. She looked past the fridge calendar, past the yellow sweater draped on the chair, out to the driveway where her own aging sedan sat slouched on its tires. And if I don't? Then it goes to auction, Eli said. Your name stays attached to the default until it's sold. Could affect your credit. Linda's mind flicked through the math. The savings account she kept for property tax. The emergency envelope in the freezer behind the bag of peas. The price of dignity. Where is it now? Our lot down by the highway, Midtown exit, secure storage. His voice shifted just slightly. Less script, more man. Between you and me, it's in perfect condition. You'd be driving it off the lot same day. She let that picture form in her mind. Her behind the wheel, not asking anyone for anything, not waiting, not pacing. I'll need to think, she said, though she already knew she would not be sleeping on it. That's fine. Call back if you decide. I'm here till 6, Monday through Saturday. They hung up, and for a moment the only sound was the tick of the kitchen clock. The quiet felt different now. Charged. A knock sounded on the side door. Linda startled, heart lurching, then relaxed when she saw Maggie's shape through the frosted glass, bundled in her quilted coat. You look like someone reading their own obituary, Maggie said as she stepped in, stamping cold off her boots. Linda slid the letter across the table. Maggie read it once, eyebrows rising, then listened as Linda recounted the call. Eli's calm voice, the repossession, the offer. When she finished, Maggie leaned back and let out a laugh that was half disbelief, half delight. Linda Foster, that's not just a ride. She shook her head slowly, savoring the thought. That's poetic justice with leather seats. Linda felt the corner of her mouth lift. She didn't often let herself imagine winning anything anymore. It's money I could use elsewhere, she said carefully. It's money buying you freedom. And if it sticks in his craw? Maggie's grin widened. That's just seasoning. Linda traced the rim of her coffee mug. Somewhere under the fear and fatigue was a spark. Small, but bright enough to see. She glanced again at the clock, the second hand sweeping forward. They're open tomorrow? She asked. Maggie's eyes lit. I'll drive you. Linda hesitated, thinking of her empty driveway. The phone still warm from Eli's voice, and the way the black sedan had gleamed at last summer's cookout. No, she said finally, softly, but with a steel she hadn't heard from herself in months. I think I'll drive myself. Maggie blinked. In what? Linda's gaze went to the letter, then to the old sedan outside. Something tells me I'll have a different set of keys by tomorrow afternoon. The thought hung between them, half plan, half promise, while the wind rattled the back door like someone impatient to be let in. The next morning broke in that flat Midwestern way, no sunrise drama, just a slow lifting of the dark until the frost on her lawn turned from silver to pale yellow. Linda dressed in layers, thermal shirt, her softest cardigan, the brown wool coat that still smelled faintly of cedar from the attic. She tucked the letter from Midtown Asset Recovery into her purse, along with her checkbook and a pen that didn't skip. Her old sedan wheezed when she turned the key, the dash lights blinking like tired eyes. She coaxed it down the highway, merging with the steady stream of commuters until the Midtown exit loomed. The lot was tucked behind a chain-link fence topped with spirals of razor wire. A faded banner flapped against the gate, Midtown Asset Recovery, in letters that had weathered too many winters. Gravel crunched under her tires as she pulled into the visitor's space. Inside the gate, rows of cars sat like animals in a shelter, some dented, some gleaming, all waiting for their fates. She spotted it immediately. Derek's black sedan parked dead center like it knew it was the prize of the yard. Even under the thin film of overnight frost it gleamed. Chrome catching the weak sun, paint so deep it looked like you could fall into it. It was locked, of course. The windows reflected the sky and, faintly, her own face. Pale, hair tucked under her knit cap, jaw set. She imagined Derek's reflection there instead, his grin when he'd bragged about the leather seats. "Mrs. Foster?" She turned to see a man walking toward her from the small office, a squat building with blinds half closed against the glare. Eli was just as she'd pictured from his voice. Work boots, a navy jacket with his name stitched above the pocket, eyes sharp but not unkind. "You came in," he said, holding the gate key in one hand. "I did." Her breath made little puffs in the cold air. "Let's get this done." Inside the office the heat was turned up too high, smelling faintly of burnt coffee and old carpet. Eli sat behind a desk stacked with file folders. He flipped one open, pulling out a printed ledger. "Balance on the loan," he said, pointing to the top figure. "Repossession and storage fees here, total at the bottom. No hidden extras. Once you pay, the vehicle's yours free and clear. No liens, no tricks." The number made her stomach tighten, but not enough to stop her. It wasn't about the math anymore. It was about the principle, the control. She opened her checkbook, wrote each number in firm strokes, and slid the check across the desk. Eli looked at it, then at her. "Most folks hem and haw. You didn't." "Most folks aren't me," she said, and was surprised at the steadiness in her own voice. He gave a small, knowing nod, stamped the paperwork, and slid a ring of keys toward her. "Gate's open. I'll walk you to it." They crossed the gravel again, her boots crunching in sync with his heavier steps. At the sedan, he unlocked the driver's side and stepped back. "All yours." Linda opened the door. The leather smell rolled out, clean, rich, untouched by fast food wrappers or spilled coffee. She lowered herself into the seat, feeling the subtle give of upholstery that hadn't learned anyone's shape yet. Her hands found the wheel, smooth and cool under her fingers. The dash lit up with a polite chime when she turned the key. The engine purred, none of the coughs and rattles she'd grown used to. She sat there for a moment longer than necessary, letting the quiet rush of it move through her. This wasn't just transportation, this was leverage. Eli gave her a small salute from outside. "Drive safe, Mrs. Foster." She put it in gear, the sedan gliding forward with the kind of responsiveness that made her old car feel like a tractor in comparison. The highway back to her neighborhood seemed shorter in this seat, the world outside her windows sharper. When she pulled into her driveway, the morning frost was still lingering on the grass. She eased the sedan into the garage, shutting the door behind her with deliberate slowness, like sealing something precious away. For a long moment, she stayed in the driver's seat, the engine ticking as it cooled. The garage smelled faintly of motor oil and the faint sweet scent of the car's interior. Somewhere outside, a car door slammed. She glanced toward the small window in the garage door. A familiar silhouette was standing at the end of her driveway, staring at the closed door. The silhouette at the end of the driveway didn't move, not even when Linda slid out of the car. She stayed in the driver's seat until the figure shifted, hands shoved into pockets, head turning toward the street. Derek. He didn't come closer. He just stood there for another beat, then climbed back into whatever he was driving and rolled away. Linda waited until the sound of his engine was gone before stepping into the kitchen. The house felt warmer than it had that morning, as if the garage door had sealed in a secret. Her phone rang within minutes. She recognized the number before she picked up. "Linda," Sharon's voice said, tight but trying for casual. "We have a situation. Derek's car. It was stolen." Linda rested her free hand on the countertop, fingertips tapping. "Stolen?" She made her tone light, like she'd just heard about a lost umbrella. "From right in front of our house," Sharon said. "We're dealing with the police. Have you seen it? Around?" Linda stepped to the kitchen window. From here she could see the closed garage door, blank and innocent. "Can't say I have." Sharon exhaled sharply, frustration bleeding through. If you do, obviously you'd let us know. Of course, Linda said smoothly. If I do. They exchanged a few more empty phrases, then Linda ended the call. The moment she set the phone down, it buzzed again. This time a text. Derek, you'd tell me if you saw it, right? She typed without hesitation. Linda, nope. She sent it and left the phone face up, letting the blue bubble glow in the quiet. It took less than 10 minutes for Maggie to appear at her back door, cheeks pink from the cold. I need details, she demanded before she was even inside. Linda told her, Sharon's careful lie, Derek's cautious text, her own answer. Maggie froze halfway through taking off her gloves, then burst out laughing. It started as a giggle and built until she had to lean against the counter wheezing. Oh God, Linda, she gasped. You didn't. You did. Linda found herself smiling despite the knot in her chest. I did. Maggie wiped her eyes. That's art. Pure art. You need to frame that text. They stood there for a moment, the sound of Maggie's laughter still warm in the air. Linda felt something loosen in her ribcage, a pressure she hadn't realized she'd been carrying since the phone call the day before. She walked to the desk in the corner and pulled out the folder with her treatment schedule. Flipping to the next week, she circled Thursday in firm red ink. Then she picked up the phone and called the cancer center. Yes, she told the receptionist. I'll be driving myself from now on. When she hung up, she felt the strange combination of lightness and steel that had first stirred in Eli's office. The garage was holding more than a car. It was holding her independence, wrapped in black paint and chrome. Maggie poured them both coffee, then nodded toward the window. You realize they're going to keep circling, like buzzards. Linda took a sip. Let them circle. I'm not carrying. Outside, the day had gone sharp and bright, the frost long gone from the grass. The garage door stood between her and the next inevitable confrontation, and somewhere in the distance, a horn honked, a short, impatient blare that made her think Derek's patience was about to run out. Thursday morning was the kind of winter day that made every breath sting. Linda opened the garage like she was lifting a stage curtain. The black sedan sat waiting, its paint throwing back the pale light in smooth, dark waves. She slid in, the leather warm from the heater she'd started earlier, and pressed the start button. The quiet, effortless hum was a far cry from the rattling protests of her old car. The hospital was 20 minutes away, but today it felt like she was moving through an entirely different map. She merged onto the main road with barely a touch of the gas, the sedan gliding like it belonged here. At red lights, she caught glimpses of herself in the rear view, cheeks less sallow than she remembered, eyes not exactly bright but awake. At the cancer center's parking lot, she chose a space near the entrance. The sun caught the hood just right, and for a moment she imagined Derek seeing this scene and grinding his teeth. Inside, she was met with the familiar antiseptic smell and the gentle clatter of carts. "Linda!" one of the reception nurses called, smiling. "Is that your car out front? Gorgeous. Looks brand new." Linda returned the smile without a blink. "It is. Drives like a dream." The nurse shook her head in admiration. "Well, you deserve it." Deserve. The word caught somewhere deep and she tucked it away for later. Treatment was uneventful. No delays, no complications, just the steady drip and the quiet camaraderie of the infusion room. She read half a magazine, dozed a little, and let her body rest in the cocoon of normalcy. When she stepped back into the cold, the sedan was there like an accomplice waiting to make the getaway. She turned on the radio, flipping past static, until she landed on an old song she hadn't heard since high school, something upbeat, brassy, the kind you can't help tapping the steering wheel to. The drive home felt like a victory lap, subtle, private, but wholly hers. Maggie was waiting in her driveway, bundled in her plaid scarf and holding 2 paper cups. She raised one in greeting. "Thought I'd bring the welcome home coffee." Linda rolled down the window as she pulled in. Perfect timing. Maggie leaned closer, eyes sweeping over the sedan. "I still can't get over this thing. You look like a movie star getting out of it." "An old movie star," Linda said, but she was smiling as she killed the engine. They stood in the driveway, sipping coffee while their breath puffed into the air. Maggie clinked her cup lightly against Linda's. to independent transportation. Linda returned the toast. And to not waiting on anyone who doesn't show up. For the first time in weeks, the knot in her chest loosened just enough to let warmth in. The sedan sat gleaming behind her, garage door open as if to say it had nothing to hide. That night, she slept deeply, the kind of sleep that comes when the day has been lived on your own terms. Morning light was barely cutting across the living room floor when a sharp knock rattled the front door. Not the polite kind, hard, deliberate. Linda set down her coffee, her heart already knowing before her feet reached the entryway. Through the frosted glass, two figures stood shoulder to shoulder. Derek's posture was tight, his chin jutting forward. Beside him, Sharon's mouth was a flat line, her arms crossed like armor. The knock came again, harder this time. Linda heard the knock before she saw them, a hard, deliberate pounding that vibrated through the frame of the front door. She had just settled into her armchair with a mug of coffee, the kind of morning quiet she had learned to cherish, but the sound sliced through it with all the subtlety of an alarm bell. By the time she reached the entryway, she already knew who it would be. Through the frosted glass, the shapes were unmistakable. Derek standing stiff with his shoulders squared, Sharon angled just slightly forward, her coat buttoned to the chin. When she opened the door, the cold air rushed in around them, carrying the faint scent of exhaust and Sharon's perfume, sharp and floral in a way that always felt invasive. "Can we come in?" Derek asked, though it was clear from the way he stepped over the threshold that he wasn't waiting for permission. Sharon followed, her heels clicking against the hardwood as her gaze swept the room. There was a tension in her expression that wasn't just irritation, it was calculation, as if she was scanning for evidence. Derek stopped in the center of the living room, his eyes narrowing. "I want to know why my car is in your garage." Linda closed the door slowly, giving herself the moment to collect her thoughts. "Your car?" she said evenly, the words tasting almost like amusement. "Yes, my car," Derek replied, his voice edged with the certainty of someone who thought possession was the only proof of ownership that mattered. "I came by yesterday and the garage was shut. I know it's in there." Linda crossed to the small desk against the wall where her papers were always kept in tidy order. "If you mean the black sedan that was repossessed last week, then yes, I have it." She opened a drawer and drew out a folder, her movements calm and deliberate. "And before you start throwing words around, I suggest you take a look at this." She laid two documents on the coffee table, the repossession notice and the payment receipt with her name in bold letters. The paper made a soft sound against the wood, a punctuation mark in the room's growing stillness. Sharon stepped forward, glancing down at them with a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Even if you paid the balance, it's still Derek's property. That's how it works." Without responding directly, Linda reached for her phone, scrolled through her contacts, and pressed a name she knew would answer. She set it to speaker, letting the call fill the room. "Carl Benson," came the warm, steady voice on the other end. "Carl, it's Linda," she said. "I need a quick clarification. If I reclaim a repossessed vehicle I co-signed for and pay off the entire balance myself, whose car is it?" Carl didn't hesitate. "It's yours, completely and legally. No one else can make a claim unless you decide to transfer ownership. That's black and white." "Thank you," Linda said, ending the call without another word. She let the silence that followed do the work. Derek's jaw flexed, his earlier certainty faltering. His voice, when it came again, had softened, the edges worn down by something closer to pleading. "Ma, I'm in a tough spot right now. You've still got your old car. I just need this one for a while to get back on my feet." Linda met his gaze, her tone calm but unyielding. "That old car you're talking about is barely roadworthy. It was the only thing I had when you and your wife decided you couldn't take me to my chemotherapy appointments. If you wouldn't drive me to the hospital, you don't get to drive this." The words landed in the space between them with a weight that neither Derek nor Sharon seemed ready for. Sharon's mouth pressed into a thin line, her hands tightening on the strap of her handbag. Without replying, she turned toward the door. Derek lingered half a beat longer, his expression shifting from defiance to something like regret, but he followed her out. Linda stayed where she was, listening to the sound of the front door closing, hard enough to make the picture frames on the wall tremble slightly. Through the front window, she watched them cross the yard to their car, speaking in low, urgent tones. The engine started, and the tires crunched over the gravel as they drove away. The house fell quiet again, but it was not the same quiet as before. It carried the faint vibration of what had just happened, and the certainty that this was only the first of many storms still to come. It started 2 days later, slipping into the edges of Linda's life the way cold seeps into a house through unnoticed cracks. Maggie was the first to bring it to her attention. She showed up one afternoon, scarf still looped tight around her neck, cheeks flushed from the wind. There was no preamble. She closed the kitchen door behind her and said, "You should know your son's running his mouth." Linda looked up from the calendar she'd been marking with her treatment times. "About what, exactly?" "That you took advantage of him, that you—" Maggie hesitated, clearly tasting the words before spitting them out. "Stole his car out from under him while he was struggling. I heard it from my cousin Janice, and she got it from someone who goes to the same church as Sharon's sister." The kettle on the stove was just starting to hum. Linda let it grow into a whistle before taking it off the burner. "I see," she said, pouring hot water over a waiting tea bag. She didn't ask Maggie to repeat the details. She knew gossip gained weight the more you let it roll around in the air. Maggie leaned against the counter, eyes sharp. "It's not just idle talk. They're setting a stage here, and I don't think it's for a play you'll enjoy watching." Linda stirred her tea, watching the steam curl upward. "They can talk all they want. I've got better things to do than answer to lies." Better things meant showing up for herself in ways she'd once thought were optional. The following week, she drove the black sedan to every appointment without fail. It became a rhythm: unlock, start, glide through the streets with the radio low, park in the same spot near the cancer center entrance. The nurses began to notice. One of them, a woman named Trish with an easy laugh, started greeting her with, "Here she is, Our Lady in the black sedan." It was said with a wink, a little boost before the needles and the waiting. Linda found she didn't mind the nickname. It was better than being the woman who had to ask for a ride. Each time she settled into the treatment chair, she let her gaze drift to the window where a slice of parking lot was visible. The sedan was always there, a quiet anchor holding her through the hours. Carl called one afternoon as she was returning from the grocery store. "I've been thinking," he said, "if Derek's spreading stories, he might decide to push it further. Sometimes these things turn into nuisance legal filings. Nothing they can win, but enough to waste your time and energy." "I don't have either to spare," Linda replied, easing the car into her driveway. "That's why I'd like to get ahead of it," Carl continued. "We can file a declaration of ownership and make sure the title's locked down tight. That way, if he tries anything in court, it's already a closed matter." Linda agreed, and they set a time for her to come by his office the following week. That night, as she closed the garage door, she caught herself lingering on the side of the car one last time before the panel slid shut. It wasn't vanity, it was reassurance. She was no longer at the mercy of other people's schedules, moods, or excuses. Still, the air outside carried a kind of watchfulness. She noticed it when she walked to the mailbox, when she took out the trash, a neighbor's blinds twitching, a car slowing just a fraction too long in front of her house. She told herself it was nothing, but the feeling stayed, low and steady, like a note held in the background of a song. Late the next afternoon, as she stepped onto her porch with a cup of tea, a gust of wind carried voices from down the street, sharp, male, and familiar. She couldn't make out the words, but the tone was unmistakable. Derek, telling his version of the story to someone new, and from the way the other voice answered, it was clear he was starting to believe it. The morning of the hearing dawned crisp and colorless, the sky the shade of a metal filing cabinet. Linda dressed in charcoal slacks, a pale blue sweater, and the wool coat she'd kept in good condition since her nursing days. There was a deliberate calm to her movements, every button fastened, every paper tucked neatly into the leather portfolio Carl had given her to look the part. When she opened the garage, the black sedan gleamed like it had been waiting for this exact day. She slid in behind the wheel, the leather cool under her palms, and took the long way to the courthouse. Let them see her arrive in it, she thought. Let there be no question. The small claims courtroom was on the second floor of a brick building that smelled faintly of dust and old coffee. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, lending a sickly cast to the beige walls. Derek and Sharon were already there when she walked in, seated at the petitioner's table. Sharon's hair was pulled into a severe bun, and Derek wore a suit that didn't quite fit, the collar pressing into his neck. He glanced up as she entered, his expression tightening at the sight of her. Sharon didn't look away from her phone. Carl met her at the back and guided her to the respondent's table. "We've got this," he murmured, setting her portfolio down. The judge, a man in his 60s with steel-gray hair and glasses perched low on his nose, called the case to order. Derek began his story before being asked, about how the car had been taken, how his mother had refused to return it, how it had been stolen in all but name. The judge listened without expression, occasionally scribbling notes. "Mr. Foster," he said finally, "do you have proof that the vehicle belongs to you?" Derek glanced at Sharon, who produced a thin stack of papers. Loan statements, registration in his name. Carl rose smoothly. "Your Honor, those documents are outdated. The vehicle was repossessed due to non-payment. My client, Mrs. Foster, is a co-signer on the original loan. She exercised her right to reclaim the vehicle by paying the remaining balance in full." He opened Linda's portfolio and handed the bailiff 2 neatly clipped packets, copies of the repossession notice, payment receipt, and updated title. The judge leafed through them slowly, his brow lifting just slightly. "Mr. Foster, is your name anywhere on this new title?" Derek hesitated. No, but, the judge interrupted, his voice flat. "Ownership is clear. The payment was made by Mrs. Foster in full. She is the legal owner. This is not a criminal matter, nor is it a recoverable claim under small claims jurisdiction. Case dismissed." The gavel's sharp rap seemed to echo longer than it should have. Derek's face flushed a mottled red, his jaw set tight. Sharon shoved her phone into her bag with unnecessary force, muttering something under her breath as she stalked toward the door. Carl gathered the papers and turned to Linda with a quiet smile. "Told you." Outside, the cold air hit her cheeks like a reward. Maggie was waiting on the courthouse steps, bundled in her plaid scarf, a grin spreading across her face when she saw Linda emerge. "Well?" "Dismissed," Linda said, allowing herself the smallest victorious smile. Maggie hooked her arm through Linda's. "Then lunch is on me, and I know just the place. Good pie, terrible coffee, and nobody cares if you talk about people." They ate in a booth near the window of a diner that had been there since the 70s, its vinyl seats patched with duct tape. Maggie ordered pie for both of them, raising her fork in a toast. "To the lady in the black sedan." Linda laughed softly, taking a bite of cherry filling so sweet it made her eyes water. For the first time in months, the food tasted like something she wanted rather than something she had to finish. By the time she pulled back into her driveway, the winter light was already dimming. She parked the sedan in the garage, lowered the door, and stepped inside, the warmth of the diner still in her bones. It wasn't until later, when she went out to bring in the recycling bin, that she saw it. A fresh scrape along the side of the garage door, the paint gouged down to the bare metal. The mark was at perfect bumper height. The bin sat where she'd left it that morning, but the air seemed heavier, as if someone had only just stepped away. The scrape on the garage door stayed in Linda's mind through the night, a pale wound against the dark paint that caught the corner of her eye every time she passed the window. By morning, she decided she wasn't going to let it sit like some unspoken threat. She dressed in her warm coat, gathered her documents, and drove to the police station. The lobby smelled faintly of wet wool and coffee. A young officer behind the desk looked up from his monitor when she stepped in. She explained what she'd found, her voice steady, recounting the sequence: the court dismissal, the lunch with Maggie, the gouge in the door. She didn't accuse anyone outright, but she didn't avoid the implication either. The officer's pen scratched across his notepad as she spoke. "We'll file it as an attempted break-in and vandalism," he said, sliding a carbon copy form toward her. "Any idea who might have done it?" She met his gaze. "I have a guess." Later that afternoon, her guess was given shape. Maggie appeared at her back door, cheeks pink from the cold, a knit hat pulled low over her ears. She carried a thumb drive in a small plastic case. "My neighbor across the alley. one of those guys who's always tinkering with his tech toys, has a motion-activated camera on his garage. Caught someone in your driveway last night, Maggie said, setting the case on the kitchen table. Linda plugged it into her laptop, and there it was. Grainy footage, the sodium orange glow of the streetlight casting long shadows. A figure approached from the side street, hood up, hands buried in pockets. The face was partially obscured, but the shape, the walk, it was a silhouette she had known for 38 years. She sat back in her chair. "Well," she murmured. The police came by within the hour after she called. 2 officers stood in her kitchen watching the footage play twice over before one nodded. "We'll pay him a visit. He'll get the message to stay off your property." That evening, as the winter dark closed in, her phone buzzed with a message from Derek. It wasn't short. "Derek, I can't believe you'd stoop this low. First you steal my car, then you try to turn the cops on me. You've been looking for a way to make me look bad for years. You don't know the damage you're doing to this family. You should be ashamed." Linda read it once, then again. There was heat in it, but also something else. A trace of desperation threaded through the bluster. She set the phone down, resisting the urge to answer. Carl's voice was firm when she told him about it over the phone. "Don't respond. Not one word. Keep everything he sends you. Texts, emails, even voicemails. If this escalates, we'll need a clear record. And Linda, keep the locks tight." That last part stuck with her. The garage felt different now when she walked into it, the air colder, the walls echoing just slightly more than before. She called a local locksmith the next morning. By the time he left, there were new deadbolts on both the side door and the interior door to the house, and a reinforced padlock on the garage latch. When the last bolt slid home with a satisfying click, she stood in the dim light filtering through the garage windows and let out a long breath. The black sedan sat in its spot, gleaming under its thin coat of winter dust. It looked exactly as it had the day she drove it home from Eli's lot, but now it carried something more, her boundary, made visible in metal and paint. She reached out and brushed her fingertips along the driver's side mirror, a small gesture of possession. Outside, a car slowed as it passed her house, tires crunching on the thin layer of snow. It didn't stop, but she followed it with her eyes until it turned the corner, disappearing from sight. She told herself it was nothing, and yet, when she closed the garage door, the sound seemed louder than usual, like an answer to a question someone hadn't asked out loud. It was late morning when the knock came, a polite, almost hesitant rhythm, not the angry hammering she'd come to expect from Derek. Linda wiped her hands on a dish towel and opened the door to find 2 strangers who weren't strangers at all. She recognized them from a wedding photo on Sharon's Facebook years back. Her parents, both dressed as if they were attending a Sunday brunch at the country club. The woman, slim in a camel-colored coat, clasped her hands in front of her. "Linda," she began, her voice pitched in that measured way people use when they think they're being reasonable. "We're here because we're worried about this rift in the family." Her husband nodded, his wool scarf draped just so. "We thought maybe we could appeal to you directly. Sometimes pride can keep folks from doing what's best for everyone." Linda stepped aside just enough to let the cold air in, but not enough to invite them over the threshold. "And what would that be exactly?" "Returning the car," the woman said, as though the answer were self-evident. "It would go a long way toward restoring peace. You know how hard things have been for Derek and Sharon." Linda let the words settle between them before answering. "I also know how quiet you both were while I sat through chemotherapy treatments week after week without a single visit or phone call. I know you never once offered a ride or asked if I needed groceries, so forgive me if I'm not convinced your concern is about family harmony." The man shifted uncomfortably, but his wife's expression hardened. "We were respecting your independence." "Independence is what I paid for when I reclaimed that car," Linda said evenly, "and I intend to keep it." A sudden gust rattled the bare branches outside, scattering a few stubborn leaves across the porch. Behind the visitors, a familiar voice called, "What's going on here?" Maggie was striding up the walkway, grocery bag in one arm, her scarf flapping in the wind. She stopped beside Linda, taking in the scene with a glance that was all sharp edges. "You folks selling something?" "We're family," the woman said stiffly. Funny way of showing it, Maggie replied, shifting the bag to her other hip. I've seen more of Linda in the last month than you probably have in the last 5 years. And I'll tell you, she's doing just fine without more people telling her what's best for her. The man's jaw clenched. We were just making a suggestion. Then you've made it, Linda said, her hand already on the door. And I've given you my answer. They left with tight smiles and quick steps, their car door slamming a little harder than necessary. Linda watched them drive away, a long exhale easing out of her. Maggie set the grocery bag on the counter without comment, but there was a glint in her eye that said good riddance. Later that afternoon, Linda took the black sedan out, heading away from town. The road opened into stretches of flat farmland, fields lying bare under the winter sky. She let the heater warm the cabin, the soft hum of the tires on asphalt filling the silence. Every mile between her and the city seemed to lift something off her shoulders. She passed a cluster of horses in a frost-dusted pasture, their breath hanging in the air like clouds. The sun broke through for a brief moment, gilding the edges of the landscape. She realized, with a start, that she was smiling, an unguarded, private smile she hadn't felt in weeks. Up ahead, a weathered barn stood at the bend in the road, its side painted with a faded advertisement for a brand of soda no one had made in decades. Linda slowed, taking it in, the scene so still it might have been from another lifetime. That's when she caught it in the rearview mirror, a dark SUV turning onto the road behind her, following at a measured distance. The SUV stayed in her mirror for 3 miles, never passing, never dropping back far enough to disappear. Linda kept her hands steady on the wheel, eyes flicking between the road ahead and the silvered rectangle of glass. When she finally turned onto a smaller county road, it continued straight, vanishing behind a row of bare sycamores. By the following Sunday, she understood the purpose of that slow, watchful presence. Maggie came by mid-morning, cheeks pink from the wind, carrying a bag of cinnamon rolls still warm from the oven. She sat at Linda's kitchen table, tore one in half, and said, "It's getting around at church. Derek's been telling people you tricked him out of the car, that you're hoarding it out of spite." Linda stirred cream into her coffee, watching the swirl. Church gossip isn't new. This isn't just gossip, Maggie said. He's telling neighbors too. I heard Mrs. Kelly down the block say she never thought you'd be like that to your own son. She set her roll down untouched. We can't let this rot take root. It wasn't in Linda's nature to mount a loud defense, but Maggie had a way of mobilizing people quietly. Over the next week, she called in favors, friends from the library board, the quilting group, her bowling league, slipping the truth into conversation where it could take hold. By Thursday, Linda overheard one of the nurses at the cancer center telling another, "That car's hers fair and square, paid it off herself." Linda clung to the routines that anchored her. She kept her treatment appointments without fail, the black sedan becoming as much a part of her recovery as the medicine dripping into her veins. The nurses still called her the lady in the black sedan, and each time she let it wash over her like a small shield against the noise outside. One cold afternoon, Carl called. His voice was brisk but edged with concern. "I've been looking into some public records. Derek's finances are a mess. Credit cards maxed, 2 payday loans in the last 6 months. If he's desperate enough to harass you over the car, it's not a stretch to think he might try something else to get cash." Linda let the information settle. "I don't want to live in suspicion, Carl." "You don't have to," he said. "But you do have to be ready." That same evening, a knock came at her side door. Not the sharp, insistent pounding she associated with Derek, but 2 quick raps and a pause. She opened it to find Eli, his jacket zipped to the chin, a pair of work gloves shoved in one pocket. "Drove by the other night," he said, glancing toward the garage. "Thought I saw fresh marks near the latch. Figured I'd check in." Linda stepped aside to let him in. "Police have already been out once." He nodded, eyes scanning the doorframe out of habit. "Locks are fine, but you could use a motion light and a better camera. I've got a setup in my truck I can install in a couple hours." She hesitated. "I can pay you for your time." Eli gave a small shrug. "You don't have to?" "I want to," she interrupted, voice firmer than she expected. I'm not a charity case, Eli, and I'd rather put my money into staying safe than into cleaning up another mess he makes. They agreed he'd come by Saturday to install the system. After he left, Linda stood in the garage a while, looking at the car under the cold fluorescent light. Outside, the wind rattled the branches against the siding. When she finally turned to go back inside, she thought she heard it. A low rumble of an engine idling somewhere nearby, just long enough to remind her that the quiet she'd built could be broken at any time. The exam room smelled faintly of antiseptic, and the paper on the table crinkled under Linda's palms as she waited. The clock above the sink ticked in steady beats, each one stretching longer than it should. She'd sat in this room before for numbers and scans, and the measured, careful language of people trained to balance hope with caution. When Dr. Harper came in, he had the same calm manner he always carried, but there was a light in his eyes she hadn't seen in months. He set her file on the counter, leaned against it, and said, "Linda, your latest results look excellent. The cancer's in remission." For a moment, the words hung in the air like something she had to reach for to believe. "Remission," she repeated, letting the syllables turn over in her mouth. They didn't taste like victory so much as relief, steady, quiet relief that seeped into her bones. Dr. Harper smiled. "We'll keep up the follow-ups, but this is very good news. You've done the hard work." She left the hospital with the winter sun higher than it had been in weeks, the black sedan waiting in its usual spot. The leather seat felt warmer than usual when she slid in, as if it understood the weight she'd just set down. By evening, she was sitting in a corner booth at the diner with Maggie, a slice of pecan pie between them. Maggie listened to the news with her hands wrapped around her coffee cup, then let out a whistle. "Remission. That's a word worth framing." "It's a word worth pie," Linda said, pushing her plate forward. They lingered longer than usual, talking about small things first, the waitress's new haircut, the weather forecast, until Maggie leaned in. "You know what you ought to do now? Take that car of yours and put some miles on it. I'm talking a real road trip, not just the grocery store or the cancer center." Linda laughed, the sound surprising her. "And where exactly am I driving to?" "Anywhere you want. Coast, mountains, lakes. Pick a postcard and go find it." The idea stuck. On the drive home, she could almost feel the sedan humming at the prospect, as if it knew more roads than she'd let it have. By the next afternoon, she had made up her mind. This wasn't just Derek's old car. It was hers, a piece of her life she had fought for, and she was going to mark it as such. At the DMV, she slid the title across the counter with her name printed clean and official at the top. The clerk handed her new plates, still smelling of fresh metal, the numbers crisp. Back in the parking lot, she knelt to screw them into place, her breath puffing in the cold air. When she stood, the sedan seemed to wear them like a declaration. "This is mine." A week later, she pulled into the hospital lot for what Dr. Harper had called her victory follow-up. It was the same route she'd driven so many times before, but it felt different now. Less like a lifeline, more like a visit to an old chapter she was ready to close. She parked near the entrance, catching her reflection in the window, cheeks less drawn, posture straighter, eyes steady. Inside, the nurses greeted her as the lady in the black sedan as always. But this time there was an ease in their smiles, as if they were all in on the same secret. The appointment was quick, almost routine. When she stepped back outside, the sky was a pale, washed-out blue, and the air held that faint smell of thawing earth. She unlocked the car, but instead of getting in right away, she stood with her hand on the roof, letting the moment settle. That's when she noticed a small piece of paper tucked under her windshield wiper. No stamp, no envelope, just folded once, edges soft from handling. She opened it, her breath catching at the first line. It was in Derek's handwriting, and it began with the words, "We need to talk about the car." Linda sat in the driver's seat with the letter open across her lap, the paper creased where her fingers had pressed into it. Derek's handwriting was the same as it had been since high school. Slanted, confident loops, a little too hard on the downstrokes. "Ma." He began with an apology of sorts, though it came wrapped in qualifiers. He'd been under enormous stress, dealing with things no one knew about, and not thinking clearly when all this started. He wrote about money troubles, jobs falling through, bills piling up, how the repossession had blindsided him, and how he'd felt betrayed when she kept the car. Then came the pivot. "I'm willing to split the car with you if we can put this behind us. You can have it half the time, me the other half. I'll even cover maintenance if you'll agree to let this go." Linda let the letter fall against the steering wheel and exhaled through her nose, a sound halfway to a laugh, not the kind born of amusement, but the kind that comes when a thing is so absurd it doesn't deserve anger. She folded it carefully, smoothed the edge, and tucked it into the glove compartment beside the insurance papers. At her kitchen table, she took out a fresh sheet of stationery. The pen hovered for only a moment before she wrote in her clean, deliberate script, "My forgiveness is not for sale. No greeting. No signature." She slipped it into an envelope, sealed it, and left it in the mailbox for the afternoon pickup. When Maggie came over later, bringing a jar of her homemade jam, just because, Linda slid her the letter to read. Maggie's eyebrows rose, then she laughed outright, leaning back in her chair. "Oh, that's perfect," she said. "Short enough he can't twist it, sharp enough he'll feel it every time he thinks about calling you again." She raised her coffee mug like a glass of champagne. "To boundaries." "To boundaries," Linda echoed, tapping her mug to Maggie's. The next day, Carl called to say he'd filed paperwork with the State Motor Vehicle Bureau, an official declaration that would prevent any liens from being placed on the car without her consent. "This locks it down," he said. "Even if he tries something sideways, the title's ironclad." "Thank you," she said, meaning more than just the paperwork. Life settled into a quieter rhythm. The letters stopped, the gossip dulled to a faint hum, and the black sedan became just another car in the neighborhood, except to her. To her, it was still the line she had drawn and kept. Then, on a Wednesday morning, Maggie showed up with her phone in hand, eyes bright. "You're not going to believe this," she said, thrusting the screen toward Linda. There, on the local paper's website, was a headline, "Lady in the Black Sedan, a story of recovery and resolve." The article told the whole arc, without naming Derek or Sharon, about a cancer survivor who fought for her independence, drove herself to every appointment, and held her ground when pressured to give it up. There was even a photo. Linda stepping out of the sedan in the hospital parking lot, smiling faintly, scarf tucked around her neck. "I didn't talk to them," Linda said, scanning the piece. "No, but somebody did," Maggie replied. "My guess is one of the nurses. This is good, Linda. People need to see it's possible to come out the other side stronger." Over the next few days, strangers stopped her in the grocery store to say they'd read about her. An older man at the post office tipped his hat and told her his wife was going through chemo too, and her story had given them hope. One afternoon, she found a note taped to her own mailbox. Not from Derek this time, but from a woman she didn't know. It was written in a shaky hand. "I haven't driven myself anywhere in years. Today I'm going to try." Linda stood on her porch with the paper in her hands, the winter air sharp in her lungs. Down the block, the black sedan gleamed in the pale sun, looking less like a prize now and more like a beginning. And just as she turned to go back inside, her phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number and a single text. "You don't know me, but I think I need your help." The auditorium at the community center smelled faintly of fresh coffee and floor polish, the kind of scent that made Linda think of PTA meetings from another lifetime. She'd been asked to speak at the hospital's annual wellness luncheon, a mix of patients, staff, and local supporters, and now she stood at the edge of the stage, smoothing the folded sheet of paper in her hands. The woman at the podium introduced her as a survivor, a neighbor, and a reminder that strength wears many faces. The applause that followed was warm, not polite. She could feel the sincerity in it. Linda stepped forward, adjusting the microphone. The light from the high windows caught the silver in her hair. She began without preamble. "When I was sick, people told me I was strong," she said. "But the truth is, I didn't feel strong. I felt like I was hanging onto the edges of my life by my fingertips. What I learned is that strength isn't about feeling brave. It's about refusing to let someone else decide what you're capable of." She didn't name Derek. She didn't have to. When you rely on others for help, you see the truth of their priorities, and sometimes that truth is hard to accept. There were days when a simple ride to the hospital was too much to ask, so I stopped asking. I found a way to get there myself, and in that driver's seat I found something I didn't expect: dignity. The room was quiet, attentive. She let the silence breathe before continuing. Independence isn't about doing everything alone. It's about having the means to move forward when others step back. And community, real community, isn't built on favors you have to beg for. It's built on people who step forward without being asked. In the front row, she saw one of her infusion nurses, smiling through misted eyes. A man she didn't know nodded slowly, like her words were confirming something he'd already felt. "I want you to think about the people in your life who might be hanging on by their fingertips," she said. "Ask yourself, are you stepping forward or are you stepping back?" When she finished, there was a beat of stillness. Then the first pair of hands began to clap, and the sound swelled until the whole room was on its feet. It wasn't the roaring applause of a performance. It was the kind of ovation that carried weight, like they were thanking her for saying something they'd all been holding in. Afterward, the hospital's community outreach coordinator asked for a photo, saying they wanted to feature her in the next newsletter. "You've given people a lot to think about," she said. 2 days later, the newsletter arrived in her inbox. A picture of her at the podium, her expression steady, captioned simply, "Linda Foster, driving her own recovery." That evening, Eli knocked on her side door, a paper coffee cup in each hand. "Saw you in the newsletter," he said, stepping into the kitchen. "Figured I'd drop by before you get too famous to talk to the rest of us." She laughed. "Fame's overrated. I'll settle for warm coffee." They sat for a while at the table, talking about nothing urgent: weather, neighborhood repairs, the price of lumber. When he left, he tapped the garage door on his way out like it was a good luck charm. Not long after, Maggie arrived with her usual brisk energy and a tote bag full of groceries. She tossed her scarf onto a chair, poured herself a glass of water, and leaned on the counter. "You realize what you did up there, don't you?" "Gave a speech," Linda said. Maggie shook her head. "You turned their neglect into your horsepower. That's alchemy, Linda. Real alchemy." Linda smiled at the phrase, but it stuck in her head after Maggie left. She stood in the garage later, looking at the black sedan in the low light, and thought about how much road still stretched ahead. That's when her phone buzzed again. Another unfamiliar number, another short message. "I heard you speak today. I have a story you need to hear." The trunk of the black sedan stood open in the pale morning light, swallowing the last of the bags Maggie heaved inside. She had insisted on bringing enough snacks for an army: 3 kinds of chips, a tin of cookies, and a thermos that smelled of strong coffee even through the lid. "Travel fuel," she said, slamming the trunk with satisfaction. "And before you say anything, no, it's not too much." Linda just smiled, slipping behind the wheel. The leather was warm from the sun already, the faint scent of polish mingling with the lavender sachet Maggie had tucked into the door pocket. The route west would take them through farmland, small towns, and finally the winding climb toward the coast. The road unfurled beneath them like a ribbon, each mile a little quieter in Linda's head than the one before. They stopped often, at a roadside diner where the pancakes came the size of hubcaps, at an antique shop that smelled of cedar and old books, at a fruit stand where the woman behind the counter threw in extra apples, just because. Every stop carried a small joy: Maggie laughing with a stranger over a jar of pickled okra, the way the waitress at the diner scribbled their order on a napkin when she couldn't find her pad, the sea wind starting to edge into the air even before they saw the water. In between, the sedan hummed steadily, the kind of engine note that seemed to match Linda's breathing. She realized somewhere outside of a town called Bell's Crossing that she hadn't thought about Derek all day, not his words, not his demands, not the weight he'd tried to anchor to her life. The silence where his presence used to be was more than peaceful. It was healing. By late afternoon, the road began to curve, pine trees giving way to glimpses of steel-blue water between the cliffs. They pulled into a turnout high above the ocean, the wind tugging at their coats as they stepped out. Below them, waves struck the rocks in white bursts, the sound a steady pulse that seemed older than everything they'd been through. "Worth the drive?" Maggie asked, hair whipping across her face. Linda didn't answer right away. She leaned against the hood, feeling the solid weight of the car beneath her and the horizon stretching in every direction. "More than worth it," she said at last. They lingered until the sun began to slide toward the water, painting the surface in molten gold. The air cooled quickly, and they got back in, following the coast road until they found a small inn with a view of the beach. Dinner was clam chowder served in thick white bowls, eaten while watching the last light fade beyond the glass. That night, Linda stood at the window of their room, the black sedan parked below, its roof glinting faintly under the street lamp. She thought of the first time she'd turned the key, the battles fought to keep it, the miles already behind them. When morning came, they took the long way home, stopping at a roadside stand for fresh bread, at a thrift store where Maggie found a scarf she didn't need, and at one last overlook where the ocean was a sheet of hammered silver. Somewhere on that return leg, Linda felt it settle in her chest, the quiet certainty that she had crossed a line she would never uncross. This car might have started as theirs, tangled in debt and obligation, but it had always been hers in the ways that mattered. And as the road straightened ahead, horizon open and waiting, she thought, "And every mile forward is mine to keep."